On today's episode, I'm going to be sharing with you the 3 biggest mistakes leaders make when instilling resilience in themselves and their team. Make sure to stay tuned. Welcome back to my show where high achievers get productive, get promoted, and get the corner office. Make sure to like and subscribe to this channel because each and every Wednesday I release a new episode that helps you accelerate your career. So in today's episode, you'll discover the 3 biggest mistakes that leaders make when trying to instill resilience in themselves and their team. Resilience is your ability to bounce back from a challenge. Challenges, change, and stress are imminent to your career and in the day-to-day work of every team and organization in the world. Yet, when instilling resilience, lots of people make a lot of mistakes, and this can actually be counterproductive to your resilience and actually make you less resilient. But the good news is, just by tuning into these 3 biggest mistakes, you can avoid them, avoid that counterproductivity aspect to it, and then move on to a much more productive strategy that I'm going to share with you right now. Mistake number 1, to develop resilience, you must take care of the urgent, pressing need. Yes, you need to take care of the urgent, but what about the important? Stephen Covey and President Dwight Eisenhower all had this philosophy on the urgent is seldom important and the important is seldom urgent. And from a resilience standpoint, when you're just focused always on this urgent need, what about the long-term pressing needs that need to get addressed? This is so important in your career and your workday and instilling resilience in your team because you build resilience more easily by not just staying focused on always the short-term fire drills, but talking about what is the more inspiring long-term focus. And this is really important when it comes to resilience level, because what's more motivating? Is it to take care of the fire drill today? Or is it to, hey, I'm gonna take care of what I need to do because it helps us build towards our long-term goals as a team and as ourselves as individuals growing in our career. So the key idea here is to stay focused on the long term and give yourself an inspiring vision. And then of course, communicate that to your team because that's gonna help them stay focused and maintain their resilience and build their focus and productivity for the long haul. A quick example of this is I had a client who talked about how she was building resilience in her team by piling on fire drill after fire drill after fire drill. And instead of building resilience, because she was essentially saying that by teaching them to react quickly to fire drills and jumping on these individual activities, they were essentially able to build their resilience for long-term excellence. But what we found was it was actually tearing them down and actually making them less resilient. So yes, you gotta take care of those short-term needs, but don't forget to start taking action on those long-term goals that are gonna help the team stay motivated for the long haul. Number 2, you need to sacrifice your health and well-being to become more resilient. So many individuals, myself included, have been willing to sacrifice our personal health, including our mental, physical, even our financial well-being to meet goals. But turns out when we make our professional goals based upon personal sacrifice, it doesn't work out very well for the long term because our careers, our long-term goals as an organization, it's usually not a sprint, it's a marathon. And so we've got to learn to pace ourselves in a more effective way. And turns out pacing yourself versus just sacrificing time and time again is a far more excellent way, a far more motivating, a far more successful way over the long haul to build resilience. So thinking about a marathon, to finish a marathon, you've got to pace yourself over time. And this pacing sometimes doesn't feel as productive. In fact, you may see people passing you. You may feel like you're losing the race. But in a marathon, as a first component of this, is to finish the marathon. Finishing the marathon is equally as important as running it. So before you start beating yourself up from saying, hey, I'm not winning the race, notice the process of completing it first, which is about our career, right? Achieving those goals, achieving our career path. So your career is a marathon, not a sprint. And if you stay in the sprint mindset, you're only gonna be able to go so long without suffering some sort of burnout or injury or something along those lines. So make sure that you're focused on the marathon mindset when it comes to building resilience, not just sacrificing for the short term. So when it comes to thinking about this big mistake of sacrificing your health and well-being, I want you to think about this distinction that was given to me by Dan Newby, has a great book about emotional intelligence called The Unopened Gift. It's a difference between sacrifice versus service. Turns out that the same actions we do at work can be done through either lens. But if you and your team are trying to build your resilience on and on and on through sacrifice, that can be depleting over time. But activities that can be done in the mindset of service, which means you're giving more, but you're also receiving reciprocally the benefit. And so how do you instill a mindset of service versus sacrifice? Is to focus on the bigger picture, which we talked about under mistake number one, and making sure that you're helping your team get the feedback that they need to improve, and also the same feedback they need to be nurtured and grow as professionals and ultimately feel supported. Now, before I get into the third big mistake here, make sure you stick around to the end of this video where I'm going to share with you an example that I think is really going to resonate and ties all of this together. The third biggest mistake is that you become more resilient by surviving. It turns out if we're not focusing on thriving, we're not growing and identifying the opportunities, and we're just missing out on so much. And this is a huge mistake when establishing resilience. So the key here is instead of focusing on bouncing back from a challenge, focus on bouncing forward. So when you bounce forward, you are identifying the opportunities, you're focused on growth. Now, admittedly, challenges can bring you down a few notches, but work through that process. Accept the challenge as it is versus denying it that it ever happened, and then begin to work your way back forward to saying, hey, what opportunity could this represent? I have an organization that I work with where a senior leader turned over, and it seemed like when that senior leader left, the entire organization was going to collapse. And people, to be honest, were completely freaking out about this. But fast forward, they begin to identify these opportunities to thrive. They brought in someone with a different skill set, that brought a different perspective in. And before you know it, they'd established a new line of revenue for this organization that actually was even more beneficial than the several combined that they had before. So I promised earlier in the video, I was going to give you a quick example to help tie all this together. So I had a client who is well known for her emails. In the subject line, she would write BBF, which everyone on her team knew, baptism by fire. And what baptism by fire would mean was that she would send an email saying, hey, this is a big challenge. And it didn't matter what was already on their plate. This stuff was going to really stretch the person, but the BBF email meant they just got to get through it. It was almost like she was testing them in order to build their resilience. And yes, that could build their resilience, but these BBF emails kept coming over and over and over again, and she started to tear her team down emotionally. And then when a really big challenge came for the team and they had to make a big pivot, her team wasn't ready. They were unfocused, they were burned out, they were tired, and in fact, several people started putting in for vacation immediately when the next BBF email came through. However, she made a few changes. This is through some of these mistakes that we identified today, and that ultimately helped her change the direction of her team. So let's quickly roll through those. Number one, instead of talking about addressing all the short-term issues, she started talking about their legacy as employees. They were going to make this pivot for their organization, and this was going to help set the organization up for years to come, and they got to be a leader and got to be a part of this. Number two, she started talking about sacrifice versus service, and that she knew she'd been asking them to make personal sacrifices for their health and even personal time outside of work. But now she was hoping that they were going to start making this intentional effort more towards service for their team and the broader employee group. And she asked for them to take the same actions as they had before, but to start to take them from a different perspective. And then the third part, she stopped really pushing them, or she stopped making the mistake on helping them just survive baptism by fire and really focus on the long-term growth benefits for her team. In fact, there were two members on the team that were particularly burned out that were key leaders, and she started talking to them about how this new opportunity on this project that they were working on was going to open up new opportunities for them to grow inside the organization and ultimately take on different responsibilities and even become her peer in a different division of the organization entirely. Now, I've rolled through these three big mistakes, and now it's up to you, right? It's up to you to go and apply one of these three strategies. Stop making these mistakes on building resilience in your team and start charting a more positive path forward. Now, if you really want to make some serious progress when it comes to instilling resilience in yourself and your team and increasing your productivity and focus, make sure to stick around for the next video.